Welcome back. We're still live in the Nigeria 2015 studios here on Channels Television. Of course, I'd like to remind our viewers here and around the world that Channels Television is now broadcast to viewers in the United Kingdom. Known as Channels 24, the station can be watched on Sky Channel 575. Of course, you know you can be a part of the conversation. Just tweet at any of the addresses on your screen. I'm talking about at Channels Television, or that's at Channels TV, or at Harriet Agbe, or at Bosun Business, or at Nyota Igbe. Well, let's continue our conversation. We're looking at the final lap of the elections, and I still have here with me Channels Business News Editor Bosun Mofaye, the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, and Economist of Financial Directives Company Limited. He's also an economist, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, and Nyota Igbe, also part of the Nigeria 2015 anchors. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sticking around. So, final lap. After this weekend, elections are over. What next?
Transition.
Yes, transition.
And see, a change of leadership does not mean a change of system. But it usually leads to a change of system if you mean business. So what the elections have shown you is that there's a change of leadership. What the transition and the hard work, which is the heavy lifting, is when you have to change the system. Because it's a system change that leads to the difference in outcome. And that's where the hard work. So, but nobody's going to be in office until after May 29. But you have enough time to do your analysis, put your team together, come up with your direction, and people will actually evaluate whether the outcome is. Like I said last time we were here, the dog that is going to get lost will move in the wrong direction when you call it as a puppy. So very early signals will show that the new administration means business. We begin to see those signs already that they mean business.
If I may ask you a direct question, Mr. Rewane, during the electoral campaigns and all the discourse, whether here and abroad, between all the parties or perhaps between the two main contending parties, the party that came with a change slogan,
Yes.
did you discern from those campaign talk whether the change was going to be change for political power or systemic change? How did it come out to you?
I think it came across to me that they were desirous of systemic change. They were desirous of building a capitalist, statist capitalist welfarist approach, in which case you are talking about giving the poor, the abject poor, an opportunity to feed them. They're desirous of ensuring that unjust wealth was accounted for. They were desirous of dealing with insecurity, corruption, and all of that. But also, what was important, which one did not get very clearly, was the desire to source international investment. And more than anything else, there was also a phobia for dealing with the major problem of Nigeria. Nigeria cannot save its way out of an economic slowdown. Nigeria has to spend and borrow its way. So you have to spend efficiently, you have to borrow effectively and efficiently, and it has to be targeted at special projects. So all of these things put together will be the systemic change that the markets will be looking for. And the reality is that the markets will discipline anybody. If you come with a change slogan without a change strategy, the markets will discipline you. So I am sure, I'm confident that the new administration will look for a change both in its symbolic context but also in its strategic context and its actual context.
But the question would be, did you send a strategy in place for this to take place?
No, there was an effective campaign strategy.
No.
There was an effective electoral strategy. But I also do know that they were working with a strategic intent. What is economic reality is never politically expedient. So you don't go into the electorate and say, I'm going to simplify and make a much more efficient tax administration. I'm going to deal with the subsidy issue once and for all. If you said that, then the papers will carry it and the media will carry it, and then you'll lose the election.
Isn't that what we're seeing in the UK elections that's coming up next month? Those kind of discussions that goes to the brass tacks, into how much you're paying in tax, how much healthcare is coming through, and things like that.
No, but that's a more sophisticated electorate. We need to actually, first of all, get our electorate to be aware, then elevate the discourse to a point where it makes sense. And then before we now go to the sophistication as to what's your strategy, how are you going to fund it, and what what are your alternatives just in case the funding doesn't come through. But that's there. I think what has come out clearly, though, is the new administration is saying we are not going to throw away the baby with the bathwater. That is, the good things that were done by the outgoing administration will be sustained and improved upon, while some other things, but more than anything else, the key difference will be in terms of how do you deal with corruption and leakages.
Okay, let me ask you a specific question. So May 29th, according to some sources yesterday, was when the incoming ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, will unveil its strategies for job creation. What are your expectations?
I think.
What do you think President-elect Buhari will say on May 29th?
I think there will be a wish list and a lot of talk about job creation, but jobs are created by the private sector. The government actually puts in place certain parameters that will encourage people to invest at a small and medium scale. So there'll be guarantees, there'll be funding, there'll be equity, development financial institutions and all that. But you see, investment is a function of confidence. Confidence is a function of lack of anxiety or low risk. Once the government sets the tone, once Buhari sets the tone of saying no tolerance for fraud, no tolerance for leakages, no tolerance, and I want to run an efficient administration, everybody will take a cue from there. And it's not going to be overnight. There's no silver bullet. It's just the directional thing that Nigerians will now know that we got to work our way out, and that there's a relationship between work and reward. You can't just become an overnight sensation. You have a briefcase today, the next day you have a private jet. No, those kind of overnight sensations are not going to exist under this.
Do you think? So now let's talk about the private jets, the luxury list. Do you think there should the tax on those luxury jets, private jets, should be increased from what the current finance minister proposed?
Well, a lot of those private jets are not owned by the supposed owners. They lease them, but there's a lot of show. So, but you're going to have a lot of former rich men in Nigeria in another 6 months.
So we're going for a redenomination, political redenomination of the currency.
Well, ex-rich men.
Okay, so when we're talking about political redenomination, as the case may be, and looking at the strategies that we're expecting should be, coming into place, should they be more patriotic or more realistic?
Well, patriotism is an emotional reaction because you love your nation, you love whatever it is, you're patriotic. Realism is dealing with the reality. So that's the rational part of things. But you need the two, because the human being is made of both of its emotional and its rational position. So there are rational expectations, emotional expectations. You align them, and investors normally react to things rationally. Investors deal with realism. Nigeria has a $400 billion infrastructure gap. Which of these investments and how are they going to fund it? That discussion is going to take place between the Nigerian government, international partners, and domestic investors. When they decide and say, okay, we're going to take number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to give up all of the rest, then you now know that rail, power, education, health, and all that. And then you now sit down across the table with, say, General Electric and say, look, they supply the most efficient and the best wagons and rail power stations and all that. Then you now go there and get the best. You're not going to have all sorts of transactions that are opaque. You will have a much more transparent session. And if you know, from what I hear, the leakages in the system, some said anything between 1 and 3 trillion naira. But 1 trillion naira is almost 25% of the total budget. So if you can save from leakages 25%, then from additional efficiency, another 1 trillion, you'll find that Nigeria has been running on 50% of its resources for now. And therefore, like I said, oil price at 50 is what you were getting anyway. So whatever you get at 55 and all that is a bonus.
I have one question still on the oil sector. Nigeria needs to review its oil licenses with the international majors.
Yeah.
This has been on the card 25 years down the line. Now, between our European and American traditional partners and the Asians who are cutting us, where do you think, or how do you think the Buhari's administration should handle the next of all-round licensing?
But Buhari used to be the Minister of Petroleum, so he knows everything about the business, and he knows where the bodies are buried. I think that our bargaining power as a host nation when oil prices are down is probably weaker than what it was when we're proposing the PIB. The PIB will be revisited and revised and passed very quickly, because without that you will not get the investment dollars. And the production dollars are actually declining. So I think it's going to be a priority, and it's going to be handled most professionally. A lot of personal interests and overbearing attitudes that were reminiscent of the oil industry in the past couple of years will disappear with the outgoing administration.
But do you think the Buhari's administration should pull through with the privatization, perhaps listing on the stock exchange of the NNPC, or bundling of it? Do you agree to that?
I think that will come. But first and foremost, you've got to make it efficient, right? That is, you've got to pass the PIB, and out of that, the operators themselves will be the ones that will say, I'm going to list, I'm going to do this and all that. But then the government stake, the typical process is that you privatize, you deregulate, you privatize, and you commercialize, and then you open it up for competition, just like you had in telecoms. You will do that in oil as well.
Well, let's now talk about another issue. I know that going forward is very front on the cards for the administration. That's the war on terror. What's going to be the next phase? How is this going to play out, especially in economic terms?
I think that's very important. There are two elements, in fact, three elements to it. One is that there are insurgency coming out from the border states and all of that. There's terrorism, which is throwing bombs all over the place. And thirdly is the opportunity cost of the investment that could have gone in there. But the moment you set the tone and you equip the troops and collaborate with the neighbors, you would reduce the insurgency. You would create an environment for a Marshall Plan to invest, because you need to invest in those areas. So some of the revenues that are going to be generated and some of the savings are going to be used to invest to create a Marshall Plan like they did after the Second World War in Japan and Germany. So you need the Marshall Plan. And we say that this is a rerun of the Civil War. After the Civil War, we had reconstruction, rehabilitation, and rehabilitation, reconstruction, and redevelopment as well. So we will take all of these things together for that part of the country. So it becomes an opportunity. A lot of investment goes into it. First of all, to secure the place, then secondly, to police the place, and then thirdly, to invest in it. And then you have that, and that becomes an integral part of the Nigerian economy, and there will be great opportunities for a lot of people across the country in the next dispensation.
And Newt, I'm sure you have your eyes on the war on terror as well as a major issue on the agenda for the next administration.
It was a major campaign.
And for those states where these weekend elections will be taking place, because it's not just at the federal level, I think those states, as Mr. Rewane put it there, if you're in Bauchi State, you have a permanent eye on Borno State. Yeah. You don't sleep with your two eyes closed.
Yes, indeed. But the other concern will also be those who have been internally displaced. How are they coping? Are they also going in to vote for these elections? They voted. The reports are they voted in the last election, and they are going to likely vote in these elections. But that promise of ending insurgency was a major one made by the president-elect, the party that won the presidential election. So we're looking forward to see how that goes.
Okay, gentlemen, let's take another quick break on the program, and we'll come back and continue this conversation. We're still live in the Nigeria 2015 studios. We're taking a look at the final lap of the elections, which come up this weekend. That's the state governorship elections, as well as the State House of Assembly elections. When we come back, we'll take a look at how the banking sector plays in all of this. And don't forget that Channels Television is now broadcast to viewers in the United Kingdom, known as Channels 24. The station can be watched on Sky Channel 575. Of course, you can also follow all our stories on channelstv.com or on youtube.com/channelsweb. We'll be right back.